Yes, we are on online.
It says,
we are live.
It says the stream is live.
Yeah.
Yes. It's
okay. Oh, yeah, there's a clock even 3 minutes in. All right. So, all right. Go ahead.
Sergio, it seems we're not online on the Facebook.
Okay.
So what do we do?
Just wait a few seconds and.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we are here. Yeah.
It says 3 minutes and 31 seconds. All right.
Sorry.
All right. So yeah, you had all these questions, and of course the first one is the obvious one. You want to know about how the multi-scale molar view differs from this molecular view. All right. So here I think of this as a paradigmatic difference. A paradigm is not the same as an ordinary theory. Like a theoretical difference would be something like, how do we incorporate punishment into the matching law of choice? Something like that, where you can have different views, but you're working within the same conceptual framework. Whereas a paradigmatic difference, a paradigm says, well, but what you're talking about is different, and the way you explain it is different. So in the multi-scale molar view, I'm just going to call it the molar view. In the molar view, the things that are to be explained are activities, all right? They're extended in time. So that's a very different thing from a discrete response. What Skinner called the operant, or a lever press, and so on. So what's this?
We're going to have some sentences, but they are for the Facebook group chat.
Okay, this seems to be a welcoming thing.
Yes.
Okay, so in a paradigm, what you're talking about is different. Now, the technical way of saying that is that the ontological commitment involved is different. All right, so activities are a fundamentally different thing from a discrete response. Activities are extended in time. A discrete response is thought of as momentary, and the way these things are explained is by relations that are extended in time also. So everything's extended in time, whereas in the molecular view, the key idea for explaining things is contiguity, closeness, and discrete events close in time. All right. So there's a fundamentally different way of thinking. All right. And actually, Skinner kind of began it. Even though he was a molecular thinker, he realized that there was a problem just focusing on the moment, and he started talking about response rate as a dependent variable. He didn't quite think about it just as response rate. He thought response rate reflected response probability, but then, that gets us into real problems. The very kind of problems that Skinner said we should avoid. He himself actually fell into that trap. But anyway, the idea that response rate is a dependent variable, right away points to extension in time, because a rate is not something that occurs at a moment. A rate is something extended in time. And so the molar view then is paradigmatically different from the molecular view. And I guess that answers your first question. Maybe. Do you have a follow-up you want to ask? More?
Yeah, you said that center our attention in rate is one of the problems or one of the criticisms for molecular view of the analysis of behavior. So how the multi-scale view or the molar view change this perspective? I know that is activities across time or a long time, but how is different in the concept and in methodology?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, what it says right away is that the basic measure is time. So a response rate is really just a proxy for the amount of time spent in an activity. And what I like to say is, if you are studying behavior, a lot of times researchers just watch what animals do, or people for that matter, maybe video record it, and then we'll play it back and we'll code it. Now it's so much better if you can automate that somehow. And so that's the thing that Skinner hit upon, is that you take a lever, or of course there are other possibilities, a key or chain or something. You take this thing and you get the creature to interact with it, and then you count the number of times the switch is operated. Right? It's attached to a switch. Counting the number of times the switch is operated. Well, of course, in the molecular view, they'd call that response rate. But actually, I say it's an estimate of time. It's an estimate of the amount of time taken by the activity. Each of those switch operations represents a certain amount of time. And actually, it works pretty well. So I myself use it. That's a good way to measure time. But that's what you're doing. You're measuring time. And so that's partial answer to your question, Sergio. Yeah, it's methodological, but also conceptual. And I think there was another part to your question. What was it? Or are you satisfied?
I'm really satisfied, but also was how the molar view changed the concept and the methodology, but you already mentioned it. So
yeah. Well, then so the way to now that I think about behavior is in terms of feedback systems. So you can think of the behavior in relation to the environment as a feedback system. And so you have a flow of behavior that goes out into the environment, and then the environment responds to that with feedback. And so the feedback then affects the behavior, and you have a closed loop. You have a feedback system. But notice you couldn't do that if you thought that behavior consisted of discrete responses? How would you do that? I don't know. So there, and of course it opens the door to a certain kind of dynamics as well, adjustment and so on. What else? What else do you want? What's your next question?
I will make it. The next question would be if you can describe the process of identifying the concepts of operant conditioning are not enough to explain behavior.
Yeah, well, it's not entirely true that it can't. Operant conditioning and reinforcement often can explain behavior, but often not very well. And I'll tell you something. No one up to now, I have to say, I have done this now. No one has explained performance on interval and ratio schedules. It's something so fundamental, but no one has actually succeeded in explaining it. And the reason they have all failed is that they take this molecular view, and it's terrible at dealing with rates and temporal extension. So that's a paper. I gave a talk back in May at Squab. I don't know if you were there, but anyway, now the paper is submitted and under review. So that's an interesting thing right there. But often it will be the case that the molecular view can explain the same phenomenon as a molar view, but not as well, with implausible assumptions like take strength, for example. The whole reason that it becomes, in a molecular view, it becomes necessary to talk about strength is that there's nothing to carry you beyond a moment. If you're going to talk about effects on rate, which is extended in time, how do you get there? What Skinner and what others do is they say, there's a reinforcer that follows the response and it builds up the strength of the response, so you get lots of responses. There are all sorts of problems with that, but basically the construct of strength just doesn't hold up to examination, and there have been a few papers now about that. So what else? Or did I not answer the question?
No,
I answered the question. Okay.
You did it just perfect.
Good. All right. Let's keep going.
We know that you studied with Hermstein and Rachlin and another great behavior analyst. So it is in this laboratory or in these years that you come to the conclusion that a new conceptual framework was needed?
That's correct. And, I think what precipitated it was the discovery of the matching law by Hermstein. That came out in 1961. And I entered graduate school in 1962, and everyone in the group, it was a lively group of graduate students, maybe not everyone, but most of the graduate students, and certainly Hermstein himself, were very eager to build on the discovery of the matching law. Well, it was all about rates, not not, contiguity between a discrete response and a reinforcer. It was about reinforcer rates. And nowadays, of course, I just say food rate, or I say, I have the concept of a phylogenetically important event. So I say PIE rate. But in those days, you'd say reinforcer rate. I eventually stopped saying that. But that was very stimulating, and so thinking about rates that way led also to thinking about contingencies that way. So the idea was not a contingency is not simply a pairing in a moment of time, but actually a relation that stretches through time. And so one day, when we were having our pigeon meeting, we used to have our weekly pigeon meetings, and one day Herrnstein drew on the board the feedback function for a variable interval schedule. It's a curve and it approaches an asymptote. And, when I saw that, somehow it was like the curtain was drawn back. I mean, at that point, I knew that there was a need for a new systematic way of thinking about this. Then, there was a paper that came out in 1973 called the correlation-based law of effect, and that I wrote that paper thinking that I was summarizing what I had learned in the pigeon meetings. What's next?
Great, thank you for your answer. In your book, Introduction to Behavior and an Evolutionary Perspective, great book.
Oh, you got that book. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. You said that no adequate understanding of behavior is possible without evolutionary theory. And previously, in an interview with Dr. Glenn, you expressed your desire that behavior analysis became more involved with evolutionary theory. And do you see that this has occurred in the behavior analysis field, that we are more close to the evolutionary theory, or do you see that we are parting ways more far and far away that is desired?
Yeah. Well, no, I stand by what I said there in that book. No adequate understanding of behavior is possible without evolutionary theory. I do believe that, yes, and moreover, I think I can back it up too. But I must say, well, of course, I started out in biology, and I switched into psychology, but because of Herrnstein, but I always kind of leaned that way. And then when I moved to California in 1999, and I met Mike Giesland and Jim Griesemer, those philosophers of biology, I used to meet with them once a month. We had regular meetings, and those guys taught me all about evolutionary theory, and I saw, well, they didn't teach me this, but I saw how essential it was to think in that framework. And so from Giesland, I learned the concept of an individual, and that seems to me very fundamental, very important, and that's an ontological commitment right there. And I'm not sure if it was Jim Griesemer or someone else actually, but someone brought in the concept of process ontology, and I was really struck by that. So I've kind of worked at putting those things together and talking about behavior as process and an organism as process. There's that wonderful book called Everything Flows. Um, but yeah, I incorporated that into that introduction to behavior book. So yeah, you can see, if you're reading that book, you can see how I cover all the concepts or the phenomena that are usual, but in an entirely different organization. The usual behavior analysis textbook starts out with classical conditioning, and then reinforcement, operant conditioning, and so on. No, I'm telling you that the concept of induction covers all those things. That's one of your questions, by the way. It was reinforcement. What's called reinforcement, the observation of reinforcement, not the theoretical construct, but the observation. That's actually an example of induction. When you have some activity that produces phylogenetically important events, then the phylogenetically important events induce that activity. Well, we call that activity operant activity. I never use the word operant as a noun. I always use it as an adjective. So you can talk about operant activity. Fine with me, but the operant doesn't make sense from the molar point of view. What else?
Thanks a lot. It seems like you answered like 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
So we're so happy. We're so glad. So you were telling in the interview with Dr. Glenn, she asked, what kind of work would you like to see more in behavior analysis? Her response was that she wished to see the applied or the clinical field not to lose the contact with or the influence with the basic research. What do you believe has been the case? Has it lose the contact?
Well, a very peculiar thing happened in applied behavior analysis. There were some people, I've forgotten the names, who tried to formalize it in some way, say these are the methods and this is what we believe. Very bad idea. And I believe that the molar view is more useful, certainly more realistic for applied work than the molecular view. And because it has so much more face validity. And so yeah, I would hope that applied researchers and practitioners even would take up the molar approach. Actually, it's a large part of the reason why I wrote that book, Introduction to Behavior, with the hope that perhaps applied people would be given it to read when they were in training. Well, we'll see what happens. But I have argued that the molar view is more useful, and some applied behavior analysts have responded to that. Yeah.
We hope that that will be the case, that more and more researchers and applied people add the molar view to its practice, to their practice. And when in the interview with Dr. Glenn, when you were answering the question of what you believe the future holds to behavior analysis, you stated that the process of social selection will mediate whether behavior analysis truly be present or truly show to have benefits or contributions worth considering to society. Do you believe this has been the case, that behavior analysis has some things to contribute to society?
Well, I do think that, but I also think it's been gaining ground slowly. There are a lot of people now, including insurance companies, that recognize that behavioral approaches are often much more effective than anything else. And so, I'll tell you something. Years ago, if I was flying on an airplane, let's say, and I started talking to the person next to me, and they said, "Well, what do you do?" I would say, "Well, I'm a behavior analyst." They would say, "What's that?" Nowadays, if I'm on an airplane and somebody says, "What do you do?" and I say, "A behavior analyst," they don't say, "What's that?" They say, "Oh, is that so? Yeah, that's interesting. And do you study autism?" Usually, that's the next question. But still, I think behavior analysis is gaining ground slowly, maybe, and maybe just through the applied work. But there has to be some recognition that the applied people need the basic researchers too. So it may be that, as departments are hiring people to train, the master's level applied behavior analysts, they may actually see that it's good to have some of these basic people on board also, but we'll see how it goes. But I say, if we have something better to offer, it will eventually be adopted. Yes. What else?
Thank you. You have told this about behavior analysis, and if it's known by its utility, but without accepting various of its assumptions, such as determinants. Do you believe this has occurred?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because the popular notion is that people have free will and they choose to do things, and they do things for reasons. All right, so the question is, well, will popular culture ever come around to getting, to abandoning this free will idea and thinking more in terms of environmental determinism? And I think the answer is yes, it's happening. Little by little, it's happening. But you see it, for example, in the justice system, where it used to be if someone committed a crime, that was it. They committed a crime. They need to be punished or what have you. And now it's, well, what was his childhood like? And what were the extenuating circumstances and so on. I mean, look at these Menendez brothers now who killed their mother and their father, and people are actually advocating for letting them go. So yes, the answer I think is that slowly, cultural change doesn't happen overnight, but slowly, there is a shift.
Thank you for your answer. In some occasions, even behavior analysts, applied behavior analysts, I see the case that they didn't adopt these conceptions of determinism or even other um, assumptions from behavior analysis or behaviorism. So, what kind of problems do you think that can derive from adopting the technology, but not the philosophy or the theory?
Yeah, you won't be able to think clearly about it. Uh, a true natural science deals with natural events. And natural events are explained in terms of other natural events. And by a natural event, I mean things that just happen, like the sun rising in the morning and setting in the evening, things like that. You know, the earth spins on an axis. So nobody thinks anymore that Apollo pulls the sun across the sky with his chariot, although there was a time when people did think that. But it's important, I think, to avoid the concept of agency, the idea that behavior is done by someone, instead of just saying it happens. It happens like everything else that happens. I actually wrote a paper about this, but it came out in an obscure journal in 1995, the Behaviorology Journal, about agency. I wrote, and my point was we'll never be able to think clearly about behavior if we think in terms of agency. So no, I think if we want a natural science of behavior, and that's what I'm working toward, a true natural science of behavior. Unfortunately, Skinner didn't go that way. He got a certain part of the way. But my idea is, let's put it on a really sound conceptual basis and have a true natural science of behavior. Maybe people won't like it, some people anyway. Well, that shouldn't stop us.
Great, thank you for your answer. Excellent, as always. Regarding verbal behavior, there are some molecular point of view for verbal behavior, like Skinner verbal behavior or relational frame theory of case, I think. Regarding verbal behavior, you have commented in your book that the development of analysis of verbal behavior from a multi-scale view has begun, but is not very extended or extended. Yeah, extended.
Yeah.
So, are there any current research studies that you find interesting in verbal behavior from a molar view?
Well, first of all, I'll say Skinner brought to the concept of verbal behavior, what he had conceptually, what he had at hand, which was discrete operants. So he talked about verbal operants. But although I don't think that, I think that's maybe sometimes useful, but mostly a dead end. I think Skinner deserves a lot of credit for inventing the idea of verbal behavior at all. That there as an alternative to talking about language. So that was a huge advance, but he didn't think about it very well, and so we're kind of left with these verbal operants, which are not, I think, very helpful. So my ideas emphasize the temporally extended aspects of verbal behavior, and in particular, I think looking at conversation, I think is going to be a helpful thing, because conversation is something that two people do together. It's kind of like a dance, two people dancing together. You can't talk about dancing without talking about two people doing it. There isn't one person doing it, or at least ballroom dancing. So I would say that's a promising thing, and there are some people who are starting to think about these things in more molar terms. One of them, of course, is a student of mine. That, not surprisingly, Karst Simon has written quite a bit about verbal behavior from a molar perspective, and she's working on methodology, because it's not clear exactly how to approach it. Although I must say there's a whole field of communications that has where the people there have been thinking about verbal behavior for a long time, and I think there may be a lot there to look at. I myself, don't really spend a lot of time with that, but I do think that's a possibility. The other thing is that Dermot Barnes has really departed quite a lot from Steve Hayes's ideas, and Dermot seems to be developing some concepts from a molar perspective. Steve Hayes, that relational frame theory is mostly bogus, I think. I tell Steve, I've argued with him about it. I tell him it's a theory of stimulus control. That's all. It's not a theory of behavior. It says what the stimulus might be, and it doesn't look like it holds up all the time anyway. And then as far as, well, I don't want to say anything more about that, except I really that ACT business just makes me very uncomfortable. It's nothing but another kind of cognitive therapy, as far as I can see. But but that's me. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer. And do you think that will be some interesting development in the future about verbal behavior from a molar view? What do you think that will develop from what we know now in the future? What do you think that will be developed?
Yeah, I think we haven't yet hit upon the right dimensions, what to actually measure. But there's now software that analyzes verbal behavior, and you can define categories. I read an article actually in Perspectives on Behavior that was describing this thing, and it looked to me like it could be really useful. But I'm not going to be doing this work. Someone else will have to.
Thank you. And speaking of which, I'm wondering, what would you tell to a researcher that wants to take the molar vision into the applied field? What would be the steps into that path that you can see into that journey?
Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that. I, I I know so little about applied behavior analysis that I really couldn't be very much help with that. Uh, but there are applied behavior analysts who are thinking about that. Yeah, I saw an article by a fellow who's thinking along those very same lines. Oh yeah, and that's right. Some years ago, I saw an article about um, functional therapy. I think it was called something like that, and it was all about uh, molar concepts in therapy. So yeah, I do think that people who are actually involved in applied behavior analysis will perhaps be able to use these ideas, but that's not something I can do.
Thanks a lot for answering. I don't know if Sergio has another question. We have some people in the group chat that may ask some questions. I don't know if you can still have time.
Oh yeah, I have time. Well, we have an hour, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So if there are people who have questions they want to ask, go ahead. Did I really answer all your questions? I'm amazed, actually.
Yeah, you answered like two questions into one sometimes. Some people are saying they're saying things to you. Look like Manuel Argote. I would like to express my admiration.
I can read it. It's right here.
Yes, yeah.
Well, that's very nice, and I hope people do find it useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
David Bernardo.
So, well, I'm still open for questions if you want to ask some questions.
Oh, there
Here
you
we go. How to determine if a reinforcer is a reinforcer from a molar view? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's a couple of different approaches. Of course, there's the practical way. If you put it in a contingency with some operant activity, and the operant activity is increased or maintained, then you would likely want to say it's a reinforcer. But deeper than that is to ask, well, how does this contribute to the organism's survival and reproduction? And so I think I know this not everyone would be comfortable with this idea, but the idea that I begin with is that the function of an organism is to reproduce. That is not to say that every organism does reproduce or anything like that. In fact, it's the reproducing of the members of a species that results in the evolution of the species, because some of the organisms, some of the members of the species will not reproduce. Others will reproduce a lot. Some reproduce very little, and so that's how selection works. The reason organisms exist at all, really, is that they reproduce, and so in the final analysis, all of our behavior, in one way or another, directly or indirectly, serves reproduction, but with a big warning here, that may not be true when the environment changes quickly, and the behavior cannot keep up. So we have these problems where, say, sugar, for example, has become abundantly available, and having a sweet tooth was a helpful thing in the environment in which human beings evolved, because ripe fruit is more nutritious than unripe fruit, and yet in that environment, sugar was rare. Now, of course, it's abundantly available, and then another thing that happened culturally is just about every culture in the world, I believe every culture in the world, has an alcoholic beverage, some kind of an alcoholic beverage, something that went bad and you drank it anyway, and the effects were pleasant, let's say. And of course, evolution cannot anticipate something like that. So we are susceptible to addictions. The same is true with cocaine or heroin. These things were available in the environment. People chew coca leaves still, I think, probably, but they certainly did, and the same thing with opium and heroin. So what happened, though, is that these things became very much available, and they do have these physiological effects that then result in addiction, but that doesn't take away the basic insight that all of our behavior and physiology is really organized around reproducing. Let's. Anybody else have a question? Thank you for your compliments. But here we are. The role of induction. Oh yeah, I wondered. Conditional induces right. We haven't said anything about that. And all right. Now the Pierce-Hall model of classical conditioning. So there are a number of thinkers and people who have experience with classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and who are arguing more and more. Let's say there are more and more of them making these arguments that really classical conditioning and operant conditioning are the same thing. Well, of course, the way they were thought about it, they wouldn't seem to be the same thing. But my idea of induction, which by the way is not original with me, I borrowed it from Evelyn Siegel's article in 1972. The concept of induction really does unite the two things. I mean, so, and that's what classical conditioning is clear induction by a PIE of physiological responses and some behavioral maybe, and operant conditioning also is the same thing, induction of, but that in that instance it's the activity that produces the PIE that gets induced. And so there's the basic mechanism is the same. The only addition is the the relation, the contingency between the operant activity and the PIEs. So now, however, we also have to consider the possibility that signals or stimuli that are in relation to a PIE would themselves become inducers. That, of course, we're well aware of when we talk about stimulus control, when we talk about conditioned reinforcers or conditional stimuli, Pavlovian. All of those I think of as conditional inducers, that they are inducers because they are in relation to PIEs. So, so I don't. What shall I say? I don't say that everybody has to be getting food and things. No, we are. Our behavior is often dependent on conditional inducers, but a lot of the inducers that have been considered conditional in the past are maybe not conditional inducers. That is, they may be unconditional. Things like positive praise and approval of other people. This is so fundamental. You think of things like a smile. I like to give that as an example because, the smile is universal. Everybody, everywhere smiles. And even people who are blind from birth smile. So there's something special about that. And of course, it can be trained so that you fake a smile, or you withhold smiling in certain circumstances, and that's true too. But that's a bit like training your breath. You can hold your breath too, and you can also take deep breaths. So that's those are, of course, everybody breathes, no doubt about that, and so those are modifiable. But that's been known for a long time, that built-in patterns of behavior then may be modified after birth. I mean, there's some classic research with herring gulls. For example, the young chicks have to peck at their parents' beak in order to get fed. The chick pecks at the beak, the parent regurgitates food, and so that's how the young get fed. But initially, when they just hatch, the hatchlings are not very accurate. They miss a lot, and but gradually they become more and more accurate, and then, so that this is all well known. That shouldn't be a big issue. Anything else?
Thank you. We have one more question.
Here we are. Yeah.
We have extra time.
Oh, yeah. Well, the main topic was the term contingency. On an anecdotal level, were you already aware of this journal? And how was the experience of participating in a special issue that touched on a concept that considering winners? Well, okay. No, actually, I didn't really know about the Mexican journal until I think I was approached. I mean, I think someone came to me at ABA and said, would I write an article? And that's why I wrote that introduction to molar, whatever it was, the molar view. But contingency is a tricky term because it tends to go back to the molecular view where you have a discrete response and then it's immediately followed by a reinforcer, and that's one way of thinking about contingency. But in the 60s, Rescorla showed that's inadequate, and he introduced the idea of contingency as a comparison among at least two different situations, and so I just extended that a bit from my way of thinking. The idea of a feedback function takes the place of contingency. That there's a stream of behavior going, and there's a stream of feedback coming back, and that dependency is what I would consider to be a contingency.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, Howie Racklin and I seemed like we were the only ones promoting this view. Oh, and Phil Heinlein, the three of us, all Herrnstein students. But now it seems to be catching on a bit. Well,
flowers and more flowers.
Nice messages. Yes. Well, I appreciate all of you. And I wish you all well. I hope that you find this work helpful. That's what I can say.
A lot. We're celebrating our group. We're celebrating our 6th anniversary. So this event that you're joining us is a celebration, and we're so glad you're here sharing with us.
Okay, good.
This is an historic event because having you and the other researchers is a way to commemorate the function of ABConductual, or group, where we come and express ideas about behavior analysis, some applied work, and we are doing some maybe little work for telling all the persons that we can reach that this exists. These are some important and very interesting ideas. So we are so honored to be having you and have talked to you. This is the perfect way of ending this year with some of the most important researcher in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people. So thank you very much for giving us some of your time. So thank you a lot for being here.
Well, help one another to discuss these ideas and see where they take you, but don't just work by yourself. Work, it's good that you're a group. That this will help.
Thanks a lot for your participation, Doctor. We have another colleague that wants to say something.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, Eric. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Billy. What can I say? thank you so much for this meeting. We are, like I said before, very, 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 very thankful with you, because your time is so valuable for us. So we send you a big hug from Northwest of Mexico, from Sinaloa, from El Norte, y muchas gracias. Thank you.
Okay. What do I say? I say de nada. Yeah. All right.
We wait for you in Mexico.
All right. Well, very good. I'm glad we did this. All right. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Good night. Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias,
Bye-bye.
Eli.
Thanks.
Gracias
All right.
a la audiencia.
Good
Hasta
night.
luego. Chao.
Thanks.